From the moment you tell me that you want to buy a house and you know which house you want to buy, to the moment you make the offer to buy that house and let the seller know, nothing good happens in between for you. The only things that can happen between now and then for you are another buyer could come into the game and make an offer. Welcome back to the Modern Agent Podcast. My name is Logan Richetti with Modern Realty. This podcast is a combination of thoughts and opinions on the real estate market in Midland, Michigan with our local real estate agents from Modern Realty. Our mission is to create informed and confident buyer and seller clients, so tune in to learn more about Midland's real estate market. Today I want to talk about traits to look for when you're hiring a real estate agent. And obviously you can hire a real estate agent to help you buy a house or sell a house or both. And I think that the ideal traits of the agent that you hire for each particular job are a little bit different. So I want to break those down and expand on why I think these traits are important. And these are in no particular order necessarily. They're just traits that come to mind when I think about what makes a good buyer's agent or what makes a good listing agent. And when you are at the beginning of the home buying or home selling process and you're not sure who to hire to be your agent, these are some things that maybe you want to look for or think about that might make a difference in terms of how you make that decision. Let's start with buying a house. If you're trying to buy a house, you're getting ready to get into the home buying process, one of the traits that you want to look for in your agent is an agent who is patient. I think patience on the buying side of the transaction for an agent is critically important. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. Especially when it's your first home buying experience and you've never done it before, it can be very overwhelming to think about getting pre-approved, looking for houses, defining your ideal kind of house, price range, location, needs versus wants, and all those different things. And one of the jobs of a real estate agent is to help you and guide you through that process, that learning experience, all those different steps that you go into, all the fears and the uncertainties and the hesitations that you have when you're moving into a home buying experience. It's your agent that helps guide you through those. So your agent needs to be patient. That person needs to be understanding and empathetic to the fact that you are going to need a little extra handholding because you've never done it before. Or even if you have done it before, it's still an overwhelming process every time. So patience is very, very important. You want to feel as though you're not being rushed through a transaction. The truth of the matter is your real estate agent gets paid a commission at the end of your transaction. So common sense would dictate they want to drive you through that transaction to the finish line as soon as possible, right? Because that's when they get paid. That's their financial incentive for helping you. And we understand that. But you as a buyer interviewing an agent to hire need to find one that understands that it's going to take a while to get you there and that they're okay with that. And one of the ways to do that is to hire an agent that has a patient profile by nature, that are naturally patient and naturally understanding, and not somebody that's going to yank you through the whole process. And there's no right or wrong personality. Any different personality can help you through a transaction, but finding somebody that makes you feel comfortable and helps you to feel like you're not being pressured, you're not being rushed, you're not being jammed through the process. Rather, you're being guided through it. You're being shepherded through it. You're being driven through it, but you're not being slammed through it. It's a big deal. And I know it's common sense, but not every agent is patient. And the truth of the matter is a lot of real estate agents get a bad rap because they're not patient, because they don't take care and they don't slow down and they don't understand that a buyer has a lot of anxiety and uncertainty and fear going into a home buying process. And that part of their job as the buying agent is to help the buyer feel better about that. So make sure that your agent that you hire is patient. Make sure they help you to feel comfortable. Make sure they don't pressure you to do anything. Make sure you never feel anything but supported and guided through the process. It's very important. Another trait that you want to look for when you're hiring an agent to help you buy a house is honesty. Now, obviously, everybody wants an honest agent. You want an honest attorney, accountant. You want everybody in your life to be honest with you. But when I talk about a buyer's agent being honest, I'm talking about specifically how they advise you through the process. So, for example, when you are looking at a house for sale, you want your agent to be looking at that house with you, not against you. And what I mean is, for example, anytime I'm showing a house to a buyer, I walk into the house with the buyer. I show them the house. I show them the details of the house, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the kitchen, the basement. But I look at the house through the lens of a buyer, through the buyer's eyes. And I say, oh, there's something that might be a concern. There's something that we need to look at. There's something that we should learn more about. There is a lot of benefits to having a skylight, but there's also some downsides, like they can flood and they can leak. If your agent is constantly overcoming your objections rather than helping you to uncover your objections on a house, they're not being honest. Okay. If you feel like you're being sold the house instead of walking through the house and having somebody there that you can trust, that's honest with you, looking at the house with you, then you got the wrong agent. That's the problem. And again, the agent has this financial incentive to have you buy a house because that's how they get paid. So theoretically, they're selling you that house. But a buyer's agent has a fiduciary duty to you, which means they represent your best interests. And that only works if they are acting in a trustworthy manner. In other words, if your agent is just trying to sell the house to you rather than helping you analyze the value of the house, the pros and the cons and all the beautiful things about the house, but also the concerns about the house, then they're not being honest. And you need to have an honest person helping you buy your house. It's very, very important. One of the things that I hear sometimes, I've heard feedback in the past over the course of 12 years, when an agent doesn't do a good job and then the buyer comes and wants to have a new experience with a new agent, they tell me that the agent they were working for was always trying to sell them each house. Whatever house they were walking into, they were just trying to sell it to get the job done, rather than helping the buyer compare each house. Now, imagine if you go out looking for houses and you look at 4 houses, okay? Now, imagine if your agent just tries to sell you the first house, and then, you don't like that one, fine. Sell you the second house. I don't like that one, sell you the third house. And then sometimes they'll say things like, oh, this is the best house ever. Oh, you don't like it? Yeah, it's a dump. Let's go find another one. That's another indicator that you don't have an honest agent. Okay, first of all, your agent should be honest with you, but your agent is not buying the house. You are buying the house. Your agent's job is to help you to analyze the benefits and the pros and the cons of each house so that you can decide which house is best for you. Anything short of that or above that, and your agent is not acting in an honest way. And it's very important that you have somebody that is telling you the truth. Now, sometimes a buyer will say things like, well, should I buy this house? And that's a loaded question, because if you ask your salesperson if you should buy the house, they're going to say yes. They want you to buy the house so they can get paid. But what they're really asking when they ask a question like that is they're saying, Logan, what do you think of this house? Are we making a good decision if we want to buy it? So what I would say in that scenario is I wouldn't say, yes, you should buy it. I always say, well, let's look at what it has. Let's look at what you're looking for. Let's see how many of the things that you're looking for this house offers. And then let's look at the things that it doesn't have that you want. And let's ask ourselves how you feel about that. So for example, if you really, really, really want to have a house with a master bedroom on the first floor, and we go into a house that has the master bedroom on the second floor, but everything else about the house is perfect, then the question becomes, are you willing to sacrifice that need or that want of having the main floor master bedroom because the rest of the house is great? And there's no right or wrong answer to that, by the way. It's just a matter of preference and decisions that you as a buyer need to make. So one of the things I would say as an honest real estate buyer's agent helping a buyer is I would say, well, let me ask you a question. Are you comfortable with having your bedroom on the second floor? And if you are, and everything else is great, then yes, you should move forward. And if you're not, then we shouldn't move forward because you're going to change your mind or regret this later. And then I say, if let's say the answer is, well, no, Logan, this house is perfect, but the house it doesn't have a main floor master and we have to have that. Then I say, okay, it's great now that we've identified that you have to have a master bedroom on the first floor. Let's only look at houses that have that, because we know that even if you find a perfect house that doesn't have that, you're never going to buy it. So that's part of honesty is giving that feedback and helping the buyer to naturally define and narrow in on their criteria, try to figure out the difference between what a client wants and what they need. That's part of a good, honest agent, is being honest about that stuff. And of course, never omitting things, never covering things up, never hiding or minimizing concerns. A major concern that we find in Midland all the time when you walk into a house with a basement is some kind of a foundation issue, whether it be a crack in the foundation, a bow in the wall, or more likely there's water damage or history of water or things like that. When I first started out in the business, as a buyer too, I always thought, coming from, back from Florida where there's no basements, that these basement issues were monumental problems. And if a basement had a crack in it, you could never buy the house and all those kind of things. And as I've learned more and more and more about homes and basements and problems and solutions and fixes and all that stuff, I've become much more aware of the reality of the extent of some of these problems. But some of them are real problems. And of course, some are not. Your agent's job is to help you to identify what the level of a problem with a house is, not to minimize it or cover it up. That's the difference. So when you're looking for a buyer's agent, you want to find an agent that's going to help you uncover the issues, understand what they are, and then deal with them. Analyze that data in your decision whether to buy that house or not. But you don't want an agent that's going to cover things up, that's going to hide things, minimize things, make you feel silly for worrying about things, or try to constantly be overcoming your objections. That's not what you want. Another trait that I feel is very important to have in your buyer's agent right now, especially right now, is proactivity. And when I say proactivity, I mean a couple different things. But the first thing I mean is, when you are looking for houses for sale, you want your agent to also be proactively looking for houses for sale for you, both on the multiple listing service and everywhere else they can find, in the shopping center, in the grocery store, at church, wherever they are. You want your agent to be constantly proactively helping you to identify potential houses for you to buy. Again, that's what you hired them to do in part. You want your buyer's agent to help you buy a house, which means to help you find a house to buy. And being proactive in that regard is very important. Now, the truth of the matter is there are a lot of agents. We can all be guilty of this sometimes. We get a new buyer client. We work with them for a little while. They can't find anything. We throw them on the multiple listing service to get automatic listing alert emails. And then we kind of forget about them because they're not buying anything right away. They're not super serious, or they're just not finding anything. And we don't do a good job sometimes of staying proactive and helping those clients find a house for sale. So that's one thing that you want to look for when you hire a buyer's agent. You need to ask them, hey, if we have a hard time finding a house for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, are you going to stick with me? Are you going to continue to be proactive in helping me? And the answer better be yes. And they better deliver on that. It's very important. However, being proactive as a buyer's agent means more than just looking for listings proactively. I'm talking about taking action when it's necessary. So I'll give you an example. When you are looking for houses and you are narrowing down selections and you are moving into that process of making a decision, you need to feel safe. You need to have plenty of time to make your decision, to think it through, to discuss the pros and the cons and all that stuff. And you need to not be pressured in any way. But, however, once you've made a decision and you have identified the house that you want to buy, and it's the house that you want to put your family in and you want to come home to every day, it's your agent's job to take the bull by the horns and be proactive from that point forward. So what that means is your agent needs to call the other agent at the other office and find out what the status of that listing is. He or she needs to tell that agent that you're considering to make an offer, and you need to let them know if any other offers come in so we can know what's going on. Your agent needs to be proactive in trying to get additional information from the listing agent, finding out what the story is, what the status, what the scenario is, what's important to the seller, what potential offer points in this offer are attractive to the seller, what things are a non-starter to the seller. Being proactive as the buying agent is critical when you get to the point where you're ready to make an offer, because it's then and there that the talent really begins. That having a talented buyer's agent versus a non-talented agent makes a big difference in the overall success or failure of your offer. So being proactive to gather information is what you need from your buyer's agent. Very, very important. Now, also, this is kind of a hard truth, but the truth of the matter is when you made a decision that you want to buy a house, it's your buyer's agent's job to proactively pull you towards action. And what I mean by that is when I have a buyer and they tell me that they're thinking about which house they want to buy and they're trying to narrow it down and they're down to 2 houses and they haven't made a decision yet or whatever, then my job is to be patient, to be calm, to guide them, to help them analyze the pros and cons, the risks, the needs versus the wants, the price ranges, the locations, all these different factors. It's my job to help them, guide them to the decision that they make. and I need to be patient and slow and caring and considerate. But once they decide, they say, that's the house we want. I say, are you sure? And they say, yes. Then I say, good. Let's make the offer now, right away, proactively, today, in an hour, at the office. Get a babysitter, whatever you have to do. Now you ask yourself, why, Logan? Why are you so type A? Why are you so aggressive here? Well, the truth of the matter is, from the moment you tell me that you want to buy a house and you know which house you want to buy, to the moment you make the offer to buy that house and let the seller know, nothing good happens in between for you. The only things that can happen between now and then for you are another buyer could come into the game and make an offer. If that happens, the whole dynamic changes, right? So if it's a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, we look at the house. At 1 o'clock on Tuesday, you call me up and say, we've thought about it. We had lunch. We talked about it. This is the house. Now, if I tell you, okay, well, I'm busy today. I'm busy tomorrow. I'll see you on Thursday. We'll write up an offer. How does that work? How does that work for you? 2 days. You got to wait, or a day, or half a day, or even an hour? No. Once you've made that decision, you need to get the offer in right away, because nothing good happens in between the day that you make the decision and the time that you put the offer into the seller. So being proactive and very, very fast moving at that point. I'm not talking about rushing you. I'm just talking about being quick, being efficient with the amount of time. That's important to you as a buyer, because that increases the likelihood of your offer being accepted, because it increases the likelihood of the seller negotiating with you without anybody else in the mix. Whereas waiting a day or half a day or 2 days or whatever just allows the chance of that to happen. It's just not optimal. It's not the most efficient strategy. It's not the most proactive way to do this. And again, when you're a buyer's agent and you're at that period of time where you've made a decision, you want a proactive agent. Now, just to round out this concept here, for a buyer's agent, you want your buyer's agent to be proactive, but you also want them to be talented. Your agent needs to be talented. They need to know what they're doing. They need to know how to navigate a home inspection. They need to know how to negotiate when an appraisal comes in lower than value. They need to know how to deal with a lender when your loan approval has conditions that are unreasonable and you need help organizing them or getting rid of them or clearing them. You need to have a talented agent when you're worried about what your closing date will be, what your occupancy date will be, when to, give notice to a landlord that you're going to be moving out of a rental, for example. There are all these steps in the transaction from the moment your offer is accepted to the day that you're supposed to close. There's 20, 30, 40 things that happen in between. And it's up to your agent to manage all those things, especially if there are multiple transactions woven into one deal. So for example, if you're selling a house so you can buy a new house, and the people that are selling their house to you are buying a new house, that's 4 transactions, and you need talent in there managing all that. So that's what you want to look for when you're hiring a buyer's agent, is talent. So they need to be patient, honest, proactive, and talented. All right, now let's talk about some traits to look for when you're hiring an agent to sell your house. And to be honest with you, I believe there are a different set of traits that are very important for this phase of the transaction. Buying a house is fun. It's, exciting. It's nerve-wracking. It's a little bit scary, but by and large, it's a positive experience. You might lose out on a house or two, which is a bummer. But from the day you start to the day you finish, normally, other than the loan application, which is kind of a pain in the butt, it's a fun, happy transaction. At the end of the transaction, everybody's smiling and everybody is happy and celebrating, and it's very exciting. And you go on Facebook and you post, congratulations, I sold another house, or I bought a house. That's awesome. The home selling process is not always like that. And frankly, it's almost never like that. Selling a house is not an easy thing to do. It's a very stressful thing to do. It's a very time-consuming, expensive process, because you got to pay agents to help you do it. You have to pay closing fees in the transaction. And the sale price of your house is very important to you, because it dictates how much financial gain or loss you incur on the trading of your biggest asset most of the time. In other words, selling a house is a nightmare. It's tough. It's scary. It's stressful. It's uncertain. And it's very inconvenient. So there are all these downside pressures to selling a house. But when you need to sell a house, you do it. It's just like going to the dentist and getting a cavity removed. It has a lot of downside pressure. There's not a lot of good things that go on there, but you do it because you have to. So when you're selling your house, you just got to deal with the hard things. But the first trait that you want to look for when you're hiring a listing agent is somebody who's organized. And the reason I say organized is because there are so many things to do from the day that you meet with your listing agent to the day you list your house for sale that have to do with logistics, order of operations, and coordination, if you will. So your agent needs to be very organized to help you with those things. For example, first, we need to have a listing appointment where we discuss the home selling process. We need to discuss what we think the likely market value of the house is. We need to look at comps. We need to understand the listing agreement, the term, the conditions, the costs, the fees, all that stuff. Once we've cleared all that out of the way and we're good to go, then we actually got to move into the logistics of getting the house ready for sale. And that requires a lot of organization and coordination. So for example, you need to have your house prepared. So there are things that you need to do a lot of times. You need to clean, declutter, depersonalize, neutralize. A lot of times we're bringing in a staging consultant to help you with these decisions, helping you prioritize what improvements to make into the house and what things not to do, of course. But that starts with an organization, because you need to have a structure around, if we're painting a bedroom, if we're replacing some carpet, if we're getting some shrubs pushed back, if we're getting windows cleaned. Those things need to be coordinated and organized. If we're bringing in a staging consultant, we have to schedule that. We have to schedule the photography strategically after all the staging is prepared and everything's ready to go, because that needs to be done on a day when the grass has been cut and there's good sunshine, there's good sunlight, it's a good time of day, and all that stuff. We need to make sure that the carpet is vacuumed and the blinds are open and the toilet seats are down and the garage door is closed. And there's all these things that need to be done, and it's your agent's job to coordinate all this stuff. So he or she must be organized to help you do it. Very, very important. Another good trait to look for in a listing agent is experience. And when I talk about experience, I'm talking about all kinds of different things, but starting with market expertise, okay? When you sell your house, it's important that you have somebody who understands what the values of houses in the neighborhood really are. And you can do that by running numbers and looking at comps and going back into the MLS. That's one way to do it. But when you have a lot of experience and you've seen transactions over and over and over and over and over years and years and years, and you've seen trends and changes and all the different things, that comes into play a lot when you're hiring your listing agent, because you want that person to really know what things are worth. And you want somebody who knows what the house down the street is listed for, what the house down the road sold for last month. All that experience can really play into having a more competent listing agent helping you value your house. So that's very important. Another trait that you're looking for a good listing agent is the ability to negotiate well. And when I'm talking about negotiating well, I'm talking about communicating well, understanding what both sides of a transaction want and need, what's the most important things for both sides of the transaction, and then skillfully and effectively communicating with the other side of the transaction in a way that's effective. One of the things that I see most of all, unfortunately, in my experience, is a lack of ability for agents to negotiate well. And when I say negotiate, I'm not just talking about trying to beat the other side and win the argument. I'm talking about listening to what's important, trying to maximize the position of your own client while still being attractive to the other side of the transaction so they can stay at the table. When you negotiate a real estate transaction, there's all kinds of factors that go into it. Obviously, there's price, and that's the one that everybody thinks about, what the sale price and the offer price are and how to get those together. But there are all kinds of other factors that go into a real estate transaction. Oftentimes, these other factors are as important or more important to the seller and the buyer than just the price. And I'll give you an example. I had a deal one time, a long time ago, and the seller was ready to sell the house. I found a buyer right away. They offered full price, and it was a cash offer, and it was amazing. It was a dream scenario. But the only caveat of that offer was the buyer had to move in and close and move in within 2 weeks from the day they made the offer. And the seller said, "Logan, there's no way we can do that. I have a broken leg and I need logistical help. I don't have a place to go yet. I'm not ready to accept that offer." And I couldn't believe it at the time, because it was so disappointing that we were turning down a cash offer that was ready to go and have the whole job be done, the successful experience in 2 weeks. But the reality was that didn't work for the seller. And the buyer was thinking the same thing. He said, "Are you nuts? You're not taking my full price cash offer? You're crazy." But the truth was the price wasn't that important to the seller. It was the logistics of when they could be out of the house that were more important. Now, in this scenario, you look at me and say, well, Logan, make a deal happen. And now normally that's what I'm thinking. I'm okay, well, what do we got to do here? Let's beg the seller to give us more time, or let's ask for some time and occupancy after closing, or heck, let's go put them in my basement for a month if I have to, make the deal happen. But the truth was, this was an important factor for the seller, and it was a critically important factor for the buyer because they had no other place to go. They were moving into town and they had to make a decision now. So the point of the story is that there are more important factors than just the price sometimes. There's the close date. There's the occupancy date. There's what's included with the sale, what the contingencies are in the sale. There are all these other factors like whether or not an offer is contingent on another sale happening or the closing of another sale happening. There are all these points to negotiate. There's personal property that's included or not included in the sale, kitchen appliances, window treatments, washer and dryer, pool table, swimming pool, all kinds of stuff, basement refrigerator, garage freezer. There are so many things that can come into a transaction and that need to be negotiated, that it's important that you have a real estate agent that helps you and negotiates well on your behalf. And when I say well on your behalf, what I mean is that they get things done. And negotiating with another party or multiple other parties can be very, very difficult in a real estate transaction because there are emotional connections on both sides of the transaction. For example, there might be a lighting fixture, a chandelier that's in the living room that the buyer walks in and absolutely loves it. And the seller doesn't want to include it in the sale because it belonged to his grandmother or something. Well, how do you handle that? And that can be tough. But when you're talking about a $1,200 chandelier on a $300,000 or a $400,000 or a $500,000 house, there are ways to solve that problem. And your agent needs to be skilled at negotiating and helping you and helping the other side of the transaction understand what's important and trying to figure out ways to manage the problem so that everybody can move forward. Because it's the transaction that you're always trying to protect. You're trying to keep that transaction moving forward because your buyer wants the house and your seller wants to sell the house. And our job as agents and your job as the seller or the buyer is to hire an agent that is effective at negotiating those differences and coming to a resolution so you can have a successful experience with whatever it is you're trying to do. Another thing that I think is important for a listing agent, a talent or a trait for a listing agent to have, is somebody that's really up to date with social media. And they're really going to promote your listing more than just the standard steps in the process that a lot of agents do. Throw it on the MLS, schedule an open house, call it good. We're talking about flyers, postcards, just listed marketing, walkthrough videos. I'm talking about throwing these promotions up on their stories, their walls, their reels, making YouTube videos, virtual walkthroughs, all those things. Your agent needs to be doing all that stuff. Now, luckily at Modern Realty, we have the Modern Pledge where all that stuff is standard and we do it every time. And I think that's part of what makes us special. But it's important when you're hiring a listing agent to have a real plan. That agent needs to have a real executable plan, and that plan needs to be effective. Okay? It needs to be effective at generating exposure, generating leads, and generating offers. That's what you're looking for. A lot of people don't realize this, but when they hire a listing agent to sell their house, they think it's going to be that agent that finds the buyer. But if you really think about it, the chances of that happening are actually really low. And that's just a matter of simple numbers. There might be I think there's about 300 real estate agents in our board of realtors. If there are 300 agents in the board of realtors, and each agent, say, has 2 buyers that they're working with, that's 600 buyers in the market. I mean, it's not that much, but you get the idea. The number of buyers in the market working with other agents is just higher than the number of leads that may or may not come in to the marketing for your particular listing. So the chances of another agent representing the buyer for your house is just high. It's a very high percentage. Doesn't mean your listing agent has done anything wrong. In fact, your listing agent's job is to market the house to all those buyers and to all those agents and try to attract attention. That's why you hire a listing agent. The other half of that equation is they negotiate and they help you through the transaction. They help you price the house, all those things. But the main core job of your listing agent isn't necessarily to find the buyer. It's to market to the buyers and to market to the agents to attract them to come to your listing. Very, very important. I want to talk about a conversation I had with an agent in my office recently about a visit that he had to a home that was being sold by owner. And I want to break this down a little bit into a quantifiable analysis to show you why hiring a listing agent makes sense most of the time. Not only financially, but logistically as well. So let's just break down the numbers on a deal. This seller had their house listed for sale for $300,000 for sale by owner. And the first thing that came up in this interaction was that the sellers of the house were trying to list the house by owner to save money, but they understand that a lot of buyers work with agents. So if an agent brought them a buyer, then they'd be willing to work with that agent. And I thought that's good because 89% of home buyers are working with a real estate agent. 89%, almost 9 out of 10. And they do that because they know there's value in having a realtor representing them in the transaction. So if you are listing or thinking about listing your house for sale by owner and you're not willing to work with buying agents, then you're literally cutting out 90% of your buyers, which is crazy. You're never going to get a great outcome when you exclude 9 out of 10 potential buyers from your listing. Because realtors don't want to show your house and sell your house if you're not going to pay them. They want to be paid. And buyers are not going to come to your house without their representation very often because they want to be represented. So if you're going to be listing your house by owner, you really have to be working with the agents because they have all the buyers. So now that means that you're going to most likely pay roughly, give or take, 3% of your sale price as compensation to an agent that brings you a buyer. And frankly, that's very reasonable because they brought you a buyer and they helped guide you through a transaction and they got it done. Now, what that means is unless you strike gold and you find a buyer that's not represented by an agent, then you can save some money on that buy side commission. But what does that buyer typically look like? There's either, in my experience, there's 2 types of buyers that are not working with an agent going directly to a for sale by owner seller. It's number 1, a very negligent buyer that doesn't understand the process at all. They have no clue that they need to be represented or how that works. They're just calling you up because they like your house. That's going to be a nightmare transaction for you to get an offer on paper and get that all the way to the closing table yourself. You might be able to do it, but it's very unlikely because the buyer is not sophisticated. They don't know what they're doing. They usually don't have any experience and they're alone on an island. So that's who you're looking for. Okay. Who knows how that's going to go? It's possible, but it's not likely. We're cutting out the other 90% of buyers working with realtors. So the only other group of buyers that are not working with a realtor are highly sophisticated, usually older people that have done this 100 times. And what they're doing is they're not working with an agent because they think if they don't work with an agent, they can go directly to you and get a discount off the price from you because you're not going to have to pay their agent to represent them. So either way, if you're listing for sale by owner, and you're excluding the 90% of buyers that are working with a realtor because they want to be protected, you're dealing with 2 groups of people that are very difficult to deal with. Okay? So if you agree that, yeah, all right, fine, let's get the 90% of the buyers in the database back into the game, then great, you're going to pay a commission to an agent to help them through the process. So now the marginal decision between hiring a listing agent and not hiring a listing agent becomes much smaller. Because now what you're thinking about, you're not thinking about whether you got to pay them 5, 6, 7% of the sale price to do this, because now you already knew you were going to pay half of that. So now it just comes down to whether or not you want to pay the other half. So here's the question. Okay. Here's my question to you, Mr. and Mrs. for sale by owner considering person. Is this marginal difference in the value of your house worth what you get if you do? And I believe to my core that the answer is yes. So let me try to convince you why that is. Number 1, if you have a listing agent representing you, you get representation. That is worth the commission right there. You have somebody managing the transaction, negotiating on your behalf. You have a real estate expert that knows what they're doing. You don't have that when you're on your own. You're doing it on your own. You have a realtor that has connections to a title company that understands title insurance, real estate transactions. They have the documents. They have the right contracts, the right addendums, the right disclosures. They have all the right stuff. They know what the right stuff is. Representation is worth it in and of itself, but there's more. If you hire a listing agent to do this for you instead of doing it yourself, which is a benefit right there, the listing agent is going to market the house better than you will. They're going to get it syndicated in all the places that they do it every day. They have relationships with hundreds of realtors. They have marketing and social media promotion capabilities that you just don't typically have as a standard person. So right there, it's worth it. Right there, it's worth it. I believe it's worth it for those 2 reasons alone. But there's a third reason, and this is where it gets very interesting. Now, this is very hard to quantify. It's very hard to prove, but bear with me and go with me on this. I would say it like this. Do you believe if you list your house by yourself, or if you list the house with a professional real estate agent, is it likely that you would get a higher sale price than you would if you listed it by yourself? And I think the answer, objectively speaking, if we're being honest, is most likely yes. Okay, well, if you think that it's very likely you're going to sell the house for more than you would if you did it yourself, then the question is how much more? And the answer is if it's up to or more than 3% more, or whatever, 3.5%, whatever you're doing, then it's a no-brainer to have a realtor, because the increased exposure creates a higher price, which offsets what you would have sold the house for on your own, or at least most of it. Even if it offsets half of it or 2/3 of it or 1/3 of it, all those extra benefits that you have from having a professional do this for you are worth the marginal cost, if there is any. And if you really break it down at the end of the day, you're much more likely to get the house sold because you hired somebody, even if it costs you an additional 2, 3, 4%, whatever. I believe it's still worth it just for that reason, because they represent you, they get it done, they market it better. But I think they're going to get you a higher price. I think that higher price is going to offset some, if not all, of that marginal cost of hiring them. And at the end of the day, you're going to be successful. So in conclusion here, I understand why people try to sell their house by owner. I don't blame them for the idea of why they're trying to save money. They don't want to hire somebody. I get that. But at the end of the day, with 90% of the buyers working with an agent, you're most likely going to be paying a commission to somebody to bring you that buyer, to bring that offer to you, that value of that contract that they bring to you, $300,000 valuable contract that deserves to be compensated because they brought it for you. So the marginal difference in whether or not to hire a listing agent or not comes down to 2, 3, 4% of the price. When you factor in the fact that you get representation, you get better marketing, you get more offers, and more likely you get a higher price, that decision becomes very, very marginal and very valuable. So just hire a real estate agent. Hire me. I'll take care of it for you. I'll get a job done, and you'll never regret it. Thanks. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Agent Podcast. Please follow at Modern Realty Midland on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you need to buy or sell a house, please reach out to Modern Realty by going to www.modernrealty.us. Modern Realty, your home, our focus.